The application form had been sitting on my kitchen counter for 3 weeks before I finally filled it out. Riverside Animal Shelter. Volunteer opportunity. Simple enough. Check a few boxes, provide references, commit to 4 hours a week. I'd told myself it was about giving back, about doing something meaningful with my Saturday mornings instead of scrolling through my phone until noon. I should have known nothing in my life was ever that straightforward. The shelter sat on the edge of town, a low-slung building painted optimistic yellow with kennels stretching out behind like afterthoughts. The parking lot was mostly empty at 7 a.m., just a few beaten-up cars and a truck with a coexist bumper sticker peeling at the edges. I sat in my Honda for a moment longer than necessary, watching the morning light catch the chain-link fencing, wondering what exactly I'd signed up for. Inside, the noise hit me first, barking layered over barking, punctuated by the occasional meow and the constant hum of industrial fans. The smell followed close behind, disinfectant trying its best to mask something earthier, more honest. A woman emerged from behind the front desk, all practical sneakers and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "You must be David," she said, extending a hand. "I'm Sarah, volunteer coordinator. Ready for the grand tour?" I nodded, suddenly conscious of how clean my shoes were, how new my volunteer t-shirt looked. Sarah led me through a maze of hallways lined with kennels, each one containing a story I couldn't quite read yet. Dogs pressed against the chain link, some barking for attention, others watching us pass with the patient resignation of those who'd learned not to get their hopes up too quickly. Most of our volunteers have been with us for months, some for years, Sarah was saying as we walked. But don't worry, we'll pair you with someone experienced for your first few shifts. Speaking of which, she paused outside a door marked supply closet, checking her watch. He should be here any minute. Marcus has been volunteering with us for about 2 years now. The animals love him, and he's great with new people. As if summoned by his name, footsteps echoed down the hallway behind us. I turned, expecting, what? Someone older, maybe. Someone who looked like they belonged in a place like this, with rough hands and worn jeans. I wasn't expecting him. He moved down the hallway like he owned it, but quietly, the way people do when they're comfortable in their own skin. Tall enough that I had to look up slightly, with dark hair that looked like he'd run his hands through it on the drive over. His jeans were faded in all the right places, and his volunteer t-shirt, the same bright blue as mine, had been washed so many times it looked soft enough to sleep in. But it was his eyes that stopped me. Brown, almost gold in the fluorescent lighting, and when they met mine, something shifted in my chest. Like recognition, but for someone I'd never seen before. "Marcus," Sarah said, and her voice seemed to come from very far away. "This is David, first day." "Hey." His voice was lower than I'd expected, with just a trace of something. An accent I couldn't place, maybe, or just the way some people talked when they weren't trying to impress anyone. He stepped forward, extending his hand, and I shook it, trying not to notice how warm his palm was, how his fingers were slightly calloused. "Welcome to the chaos," he said and smiled. Not the polite volunteer coordinator smile Sarah had been wearing, but something real, amused, like we were already sharing a joke I hadn't heard yet. "Thanks," I managed. "I'm ready for chaos, I think." Marcus laughed, a sound that seemed to cut through the constant background noise of the shelter. "We'll see about that. Sarah, mind if I steal him? I was going to start with the dog runs this morning." Sarah nodded, already moving toward the front desk. "You're in good hands," she called over her shoulder. "Marcus knows this place better than I do." And then it was just the two of us standing in a hallway that smelled like bleach and hope, looking at each other. He gestured toward a set of double doors at the end of the corridor. "This way," he said. "Fair warning, it gets loud back here." He wasn't kidding. The dog runs stretched out behind the main building, 20 or so chain-link enclosures housing everything from tiny terrier mixes to what looked like a Great Dane crossed with a small horse. The sound was overwhelming at first, dozens of voices all calling for attention at once. "You get used to it," Marcus said, noticing my slight wince. "After a while you start to hear them individually, like, I don't know, like a choir where every voice matters." He moved toward a storage shed at the end of the runs, pulling keys from his pocket with practiced ease. Inside were leashes, toys, cleaning supplies, bags of kibble stacked to the ceiling. He handed me a spray bottle and a roll of paper towels. "We'll start simple," he said. "Fresh water, clean up any messes, maybe take a few of them for walks if they seem up for it. Sound good?" I nodded, following him back toward the kennels. The first few were straightforward enough. A beagle mix who wagged his entire body when he saw us. A pair of senior dogs who watched with dignified interest as we refreshed their water bowls. Marcus moved with easy efficiency, talking to each dog like they were old friends. "Morning, Bella," he said to a pit bull mix who immediately rolled onto her back for belly rubs. "How's the princess life treating you?" "She's beautiful," I said, and meant it. Bella's coat was brindle and silver, her eyes liquid amber. "She is," Marcus agreed, scratching behind her ears. "Been here about 6 months now. People see the breed and," he shrugged, "their loss." There was something in his voice, not anger exactly, but a quiet frustration that made me look at him more closely. He caught me staring and straightened up, moving to the next kennel. "This is Charlie," he said, and I immediately understood why he'd saved this introduction for now. Charlie was enthusiastic. A golden retriever mix, maybe 2 years old, who launched himself at the kennel door the moment he saw us. His entire body vibrated with barely contained energy, tail moving so fast it was practically a blur. "He's a lot," Marcus said, but his voice was fond. "Came in about a month ago. Someone found him on the highway, no collar, no chip, probably dumped. Can we take him out?" "We can try," Marcus grinned. "Fair warning, he hasn't quite figured out the concept of personal space yet." He opened the kennel door with practiced caution, one hand on Charlie's collar, the other reaching for a leash. But Charlie had other ideas. The moment the door was wide enough, he bolted. Not away exactly, but toward me, all 90 pounds of golden fur and unbridled joy. I stumbled backward, trying to keep my balance as Charlie planted his front paws on my chest, tail still going like a metronome set to allegro. The spray bottle flew out of my hand, clattering across the concrete. "Charlie, down," Marcus said, but he was laughing. "Sorry, he's still working on his manners." "It's fine," I said, though Charlie's enthusiastic greeting had pushed me back another step. "He's just—" That's when it happened. Marcus reached for Charlie's collar at the same moment I tried to regain my footing, and somehow we ended up closer than either of us had planned. His hand brushed mine, just for a second, just the backs of our fingers as we both tried to get a grip on Charlie's exuberance. It was nothing. It shouldn't have been anything. People touched accidentally all the time. Brief contact that meant nothing and was forgotten immediately. But his skin was warm, and for that split second, I forgot how to breathe. Marcus stepped back quickly, Charlie finally settling at our feet with a satisfied huff. "Sorry," he said, and there was something in his voice I couldn't identify. He gets excited around new people. "No problem," I said, though my voice sounded strange even to me. I bent to pick up the spray bottle, grateful for the excuse to look away. When I straightened up, Marcus was clipping the leash to Charlie's collar with the focused attention of someone trying not to think too hard about something. "Should we take him for a walk?" he asked. We fell into step together, Charlie trotting between us like he'd appointed himself our personal ambassador. The walking trail circled the shelter property, worn dirt paths threading between scrub oak and overgrown grass. In the early morning light, it was almost peaceful, the kind of quiet you only found before the world fully woke up. "So what brought you here?" Marcus asked as we walked. Charlie had settled into a more reasonable pace, nose to the ground, investigating every interesting scent. "Honestly, guilt," I said, then winced at how that sounded. "I mean, I've been thinking about volunteering for a while. My it's fine, but it's not exactly changing the world, you know. I wanted to do something that mattered." Marcus nodded. "What kind of work?" "Marketing. For a software company. Exciting stuff like optimizing user engagement metrics." I glanced at him. "What about you? What's your day job?" I teach middle school, he said. 7th grade English. That's brave, he laughed. That's one word for it. They're good kids, though, just a lot. Kind of like Charlie here. We paused while Charlie investigated a particularly fascinating patch of grass. In the distance, I could hear the shelter coming to life, doors opening and closing, the sound of volunteers arriving for the morning shift. How long have you been volunteering here? I asked. About 2 years, started right after I moved to town. He was quiet for a moment, watching Charlie. I was going through a rough patch, I guess. Needed something to remind me that there was still good in the world. There was something in his voice, not sadness exactly, but the echo of it, like someone who'd learned to carry pain quietly. Did it help? I asked. He smiled, but it was different from the easy grins he'd been giving me all morning. Smaller, more real. Yeah, he said. It did. We walked the rest of the loop in comfortable silence, Charlie providing enough entertainment for all three of us with his enthusiastic investigation of every stick, leaf, and suspicious shadow. By the time we made it back to the kennels, other volunteers were starting to arrive, and the shelter was settling into its weekend rhythm. What's next? I asked as Marcus returned Charlie to his kennel, where he immediately curled up in a patch of sunlight, exhausted by his adventure. Water bowls, Marcus said. Glamorous stuff. And then maybe some cage cleaning if you're feeling ambitious. The next hour passed in a blur of routine tasks that somehow didn't feel routine at all. Maybe it was the setting. The constant backdrop of animal sounds, the smell of fresh hay and industrial disinfectant. Or maybe it was Marcus, the way he moved through the space like he belonged there, talking to the animals in a voice I was starting to recognize as distinctly his. But mostly I think it was the way we worked together, like we'd been doing this for months instead of minutes. He'd hand me supplies before I asked for them. I'd start filling water bowls while he cleaned the kennels. When we reached for the same spray bottle or roll of paper towels, our fingers would brush. Brief contact that I found myself anticipating, then immediately trying not to think about. You're a natural at this, he said as we worked our way down the row of cat enclosures, refreshing water and scooping litter boxes. Just following your lead, I said, then immediately regretted how that sounded. Too eager, maybe, too something. But Marcus just smiled. Well, whatever you're doing, they like you. Look. I followed his gaze to where an orange tabby cat was pressing against the front of his enclosure, purring loud enough to hear over the general shelter noise. His paws stretched through the chain link, reaching toward me. That's Milo, Marcus said. He's usually pretty shy around strangers. I extended my finger, letting Milo sniff before scratching behind his ears. His purr intensified, and he pushed his head against my hand with shameless affection. He's beautiful, I said. He is. Been here about 3 months. He was found as a stray pretty beat-up. Took the vet staff weeks to get him healthy enough for adoption. Marcus's voice went soft. He's gotten passed over a lot. People want kittens, or cats that are more outgoing. I looked at Milo, really looked at him. He was probably 4 or 5 years old, with a white chest and paws that made him look like he was wearing a tuxedo. One ear had a small notch in it, probably from his time on the streets, and his left eye had a slight cloudiness that spoke of old injury. But when he looked at me, there was nothing broken about him, just quiet dignity and cautious hope. He's perfect, I said, and meant it. Marcus was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Yeah, he said quietly. He is. We finished the cat kennels in companionable silence, Milo following our progress from his enclosure, occasionally offering commentary in the form of soft chirps and purrs. When we reached the end of the row, Marcus checked his watch. Time for the glamorous part, he said. Deep cleaning. He led me back to the supply shed, emerging with a mop bucket, industrial-strength floor cleaner, and rubber gloves that had seen better days. The next hour was less romantic than the morning had been, scrubbing kennels, hosing down concrete floors, trying to make everything smell less like animals and more like the kind of place where animals lived comfortably. But even that was better with Marcus there. He had a system, a rhythm that I found myself falling into without thinking. When I struggled with a particularly stubborn stain, he'd appear with a different cleaning product or a scrub brush with better bristles. When my spray bottle ran empty, his was already there, extended without a word. "You don't have to narrate everything," he said at one point, and I realized I'd been talking almost constantly, commenting on the weather, asking questions about the animals, filling every moment of silence with words. "Sorry," I said, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. "I talk when I'm nervous." "Are you nervous?" The question was asked casually, but something in his voice made me look up from the kennel floor I'd been scrubbing. He was leaning against the door frame, rubber gloves pushed up to his elbows, watching me with those gold-brown eyes. "A little," I admitted. "New place, new people. I always worry I'm going to mess something up." "You're not messing anything up." His voice was gentler than it had been all morning. "You're doing great, actually. The animals can tell when someone cares." "How can they tell?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering. "Body language, mostly. Voice tone. Whether you're really paying attention to them or just going through the motions." He paused. "You pay attention." Something warm settled in my chest at the words. Pride, maybe, or relief, or something else entirely. "My turn to ask," I said. "Are you always this good with new volunteers, or am I just lucky?" Marcus laughed, but there was something almost shy about it. "You're the first new volunteer we've had in about 6 months. I'm probably out of practice." Could have fooled me. We went back to cleaning, but the silence felt different now, charged somehow, like we were both aware of something neither of us wanted to name yet. Around noon, Sarah appeared with sandwiches and bottled water, declaring it officially lunch break. Most of the other volunteers gathered in a small break room behind the main office, but Marcus gestured toward a picnic table outside, half hidden behind the cat kennels. "More peaceful out here," he said, unwrapping what looked like a homemade sandwich. "Gets pretty loud in there when everyone's trying to tell their favorite animal stories at once." We ate in comfortable silence, watching the shelter cats in their outdoor runs chase shadows and insects through the chain link. The sun was warm on my shoulders, and for the first time all morning I felt myself truly relax. "Can I ask you something?" I said eventually. Marcus nodded, taking a sip of his water. "Why middle school? That's a tough age to work with every day." He smiled. "Because it's a tough age. They're right at that point where they're figuring out who they are, what matters to them. And they haven't gotten cynical yet, not really. They still believe things can change." There was something in his voice when he talked about his students, the same gentleness I'd noticed when he spoke to the animals, like he saw something in them that other people missed. "You really love it," I said. "I do, even when they're driving me completely insane." He picked at the crust of his sandwich. "What about you? Do you love marketing?" I considered the question, maybe for the first time in years. "I'm good at it," I said finally. "And it pays well. But love?" I shook my head. "I don't think I've ever loved a job." "Maybe you just haven't found the right one yet." "Maybe." I looked around at the shelter, at the volunteers moving between kennels with purpose and affection, at the way Marcus had spent his entire morning taking care of things that couldn't take care of themselves. This feels right, though, being here. Marcus followed my gaze, nodding slowly. "It does, doesn't it?" The afternoon shift was different from the morning. More people, more energy, but also more chaos. Dogs needed exercise, cats needed socialization, and there was always someone who needed to be fed or medicated or just given a few minutes of human attention. I found myself gravitating toward the quieter tasks, sitting with senior dogs who just wanted company, reading to the cats from a book someone had donated, Marcus's idea and one that seemed to work better than it had any right to, helping with the endless paperwork that kept a place like this running. But mostly I found myself watching Marcus, not obviously, not in a way that anyone else would notice. But whenever I had a moment between tasks, my eyes seemed to find him automatically. The way he crouched down to eye level when he talked to the smaller dogs, the patience he showed with a three-legged cat who hissed at everyone else but purred when Marcus scratched his chin. The quiet authority he had with the other volunteers, not bossy exactly, but clearly someone people trusted. "You're staring," said a voice beside me, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. The speaker was another volunteer, a woman probably in her 60s with silver hair and paint-stained fingers. She'd introduced herself as Linda earlier, mentioning something about being retired and needing something to do with her hands. I started, but she waved me off. "Honey, I've been married for 42 years. I know staring when I see it." She followed my gaze to where Marcus was patiently untangling a leash that had somehow gotten wound around both a golden retriever and a border collie mix. "He's a good one, that Marcus. Been through some stuff, but he's got a good heart." "Been through stuff?" Linda glanced at me, weighing something. "Not my story to tell," she said finally. "But he wasn't in great shape when he started here. Quiet, kept to himself. Took months before he'd even have a conversation with anyone." I watched Marcus finally free the dogs from their leash tangle, laughing as they immediately tried to recreate the knot by walking in opposite directions. "He seems fine now," I said. "He is. That's the point." Linda's voice was gentle. "Sometimes people need time to find their way back to themselves, and sometimes they need the right reason." She moved away before I could ask what she meant, leaving me with more questions than answers and the growing awareness that there were depths to Marcus I hadn't even begun to explore. The afternoon wound down gradually. Volunteers filtered out in ones and twos, dogs settled into their kennels for evening naps, and the shelter took on the quieter rhythm of early evening. I'd been there for nearly 8 hours, longer than I'd planned, but I wasn't ready to leave yet. "Good first day?" Marcus asked, appearing beside me as I said goodbye to Milo, who had spent most of the afternoon pressed against the front of his enclosure whenever I walked by. "Really good," I said, and meant it. I had no idea it would be so exhausting. "Satisfying." Marcus smiled, the first completely unguarded expression I'd seen from him all day. "Yeah, it is." We walked toward the parking lot together, the evening air cooler now, tinged with the promise of autumn. My Honda sat alone under a streetlight, looking exactly as practical and unremarkable as it had that morning. But I felt different. Like something fundamental had shifted, though I couldn't quite name what. "Thanks," I said as we reached my car. "For today, for showing me around, making it easy. Thanks for jumping in, and for staying so long on your first day. Most people are ready to run screaming after about 3 hours. Not me." I fished my keys out of my pocket, suddenly reluctant to end the conversation. "I'll definitely be back next week." Something flickered across Marcus's face. Relief, maybe, or something else I wasn't quick enough to catch. He stopped walking, hands shoved deep in his pockets, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "David," he said, and there was something different in his voice. Softer, less certain than it had been all day. "Yeah?" He stood there for a moment, seeming to wrestle with something. The parking lot was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic on the main road and the occasional bark from the kennels. Under the streetlight, his eyes looked almost gold. Then he pulled his hands out of his pockets, wiping them on his shirt, a nervous gesture that somehow made him seem younger, less sure of himself. "You're coming back next week, right?" The question was simple enough, but the way he asked it, quiet, almost careful, made it feel like something more, like the answer mattered in a way that went beyond volunteer scheduling. "Yes," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I'd intended. "I'll be here." He nodded but didn't move toward his own car, just stood there looking at me in the growing darkness like he was trying to memorize something. "Good," he said finally. "That's good." And then he was walking away, hands back in his pockets, leaving me standing next to my car with my keys in my hand and the distinct feeling that something important had just happened, though I couldn't say exactly what. I drove home through the quiet streets, windows down, trying to process the day. 8 hours ago, I'd been a guy with a decent job and a nagging sense that something was missing from his life. Now I was, what? The same guy, probably, but with the memory of Marcus's laugh echoing through a concrete hallway, with a feeling of accidentally brushing his fingers when we both reached for Charlie's collar. with the image of his eyes going soft when he talked to the animals like he was showing a part of himself he didn't reveal easily. I thought I came here to help animals, I found myself thinking as I pulled into my driveway. But somehow he was the one I couldn't look away from. The house felt too quiet after the constant noise of the shelter. I made dinner, watched television, went through the motions of my normal Saturday evening routine, but part of me was still there, in that concrete hallway that smelled like disinfectant and hope, watching Marcus move through the space like he belonged there, like maybe, just maybe I could belong there too. 7 days. That's how long I had to wait before I could go back, before I could see him again, before I could figure out what exactly had happened in that parking lot when he'd asked me if I was coming back. 7 days felt like forever, but I was definitely going back. Part 2. The question hung in the air between us, heavier than it should have been. You're coming back next week, right? Not just about volunteering schedules or animal care routines. Something else entirely. Something that made my chest tight and my heart skip in a way I hadn't felt in years. I stood there in the parking lot, keys growing warm in my palm, looking at Marcus under the streetlight. His hands were still shoved deep in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched like he was bracing himself for disappointment. The confidence he'd shown all day, the easy way he'd moved through the shelter, the natural authority he'd had with the other volunteers, had faded into something more vulnerable. "Yeah," I said finally, my voice softer than I'd intended. "I think I have to now." The words came out before I could think about what they meant, what they revealed. But as soon as I said them, I knew they were true, not just about the shelter, not just about the animals that needed walking and feeding and someone to tell them they mattered, about him, about the way he'd laughed when Charlie had knocked me backward, the gentleness in his voice when he'd talked to Milo, the moment when our fingers had brushed and the world had tilted slightly on its axis. Marcus's face changed, tension melting into something that might have been relief. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Not the easy grins he'd been giving me all day, but something quieter, almost shy. "Good," he said, and there was something in that single word that made my pulse quicken. "I was hoping you'd say that." We stood there for another moment, both of us aware of what was being said without words. The parking lot felt smaller suddenly, the space between us charged with possibility and the weight of things we weren't quite ready to name yet. Then Marcus stepped back, breaking whatever spell had settled over us. "I should let you get home," he said. "Long first day." "Yeah," I agreed, though part of me wanted to keep standing there, keep talking, keep existing in that moment when everything felt balanced on the edge of something new. I should go. But neither of us moved. Marcus shifted his weight from one foot to the other, looking like he wanted to say something else. I gripped my keys tighter, trying to think of a reason to stay just a little longer. "Marcus," I started, then stopped, not sure what I'd been planning to say. "Yeah?" "Nothing, just thanks for today, for making it—" I searched for the right word. "Easy." He smiled again, that same shy expression that made him look younger. "See you next Saturday, David." The way he said my name, like he was testing how it felt on his tongue, sent warmth spreading through my chest. I nodded, finally forcing myself to unlock my car door. "Next Saturday." I drove home with the windows down and Marcus's voice echoing in my head. "I was hoping you'd say that." 4 words that somehow felt like the beginning of everything. The week passed in a blur of ordinary moments that felt anything but ordinary. Work meetings where I found myself doodling dogs in the margins of my notes, grocery shopping where I noticed pet food aisles for the first time, evening walks where every golden retriever made me think of Charlie, every orange tabby made me remember the way Milo had purred when I'd scratched his ears. But mostly I thought about Marcus, the way he'd moved through the shelter like he belonged there, the careful attention he'd paid to each animal, seeing them as individuals rather than just creatures that needed care. The moment in the parking lot when he'd asked if I was coming back, his voice soft with something that might have been hope. By Friday, I was checking the weather obsessively, as if Saturday's forecast would somehow determine whether I'd see him again. As if rain might wash away whatever fragile thing had started to grow between us. Saturday morning couldn't come fast enough. I arrived at the shelter 15 minutes early, sitting in my car and trying to calm the nervous energy that had been building all week. The parking lot was mostly empty, just Sarah's sensible sedan and a beat-up pickup truck I didn't recognize. No sign of Marcus's Honda Civic yet. What if he doesn't come? The thought hit me with surprising force. What if last week had been a fluke? What if I'd misread everything? Built significance out of accidental touches and shared laughter that meant nothing more than simple friendliness. Then I heard a car door slam, and there he was, walking across the parking lot with that same easy stride, volunteer t-shirt already slightly wrinkled like he'd grabbed it from the laundry basket that morning. When he saw me getting out of my car, his face lit up with a smile that erased every doubt I'd been carrying. "You made it," he said, and there was genuine pleasure in his voice. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "Hoped you would," he admitted. "But you never know. Sometimes people decide one week is enough." We walked toward the shelter entrance together, falling into step naturally. The morning air was cooler than the week before, carrying the first real hint of autumn, and I found myself hyper-aware of Marcus beside me, the sound of his footsteps on the gravel, the way he held the door open for me, the brief moment when his shoulder brushed mine as we passed through. "So," he said as we signed in at the volunteer desk, "ready for week 2? "Absolutely. What's the plan?" "Same as last week, mostly. Morning feeding, exercise, cleaning." He paused, pen hovering over the sign-in sheet. "Though I was thinking we could spend some time with the cats today, if you're interested." "Milo?" Marcus nodded. "Among others. But yeah, I thought you might want to see how he's doing." The casualness of the suggestion didn't fool me. There were plenty of other volunteers who could handle cat socialization, other tasks that needed doing. But Marcus had remembered my connection with Milo, had thought about what I might want to do. It was a small thing maybe, but it felt significant. "I'd like that," I said. The morning fell into a rhythm that was both familiar and entirely new. We moved through the dog kennels with the same efficiency we'd found the week before, but everything felt easier now, more natural, like we'd been working together for months instead of having just met. When I reached for cleaning supplies, Marcus was already handing them to me. When he needed help corralling an enthusiastic pit bull mix, I was there with a leash before he asked. We talked less than we had the week before, but the silence wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, companionable. "Intimate," whispered a voice in the back of my mind, and I tried not to think too hard about what that meant. "Coffee break?" Marcus asked around 10:30, nodding toward the small break room behind the office. The break room was empty except for Linda, the silver-haired volunteer from the week before, who looked up from her crossword puzzle with knowing eyes. "Well, look who came back," she said, directing the comment at me but looking meaningfully at Marcus. "How was week 2 treating you?" "Good so far," I said, accepting the cup of coffee Marcus handed me from the ancient machine in the corner. "Different from last week, but good different." "Different how?" Marcus asked, settling into a folding chair across from me. I thought about it, trying to put words to the feeling that had been building all morning. Last week, I felt like I was learning everything from scratch. This week, I shrugged. This week, it feels like I know what I'm doing, like I belong here. Marcus smiled into his coffee cup. "That's because you do." "Belong here?" "Both," he said, meeting my eyes. "Know what you're doing and belong here." Linda made a small approving sound from behind her crossword, but when I glanced at her, she was studiously focused on her puzzle, pencil tapping against her teeth. "What about you?" I asked Marcus. "Do you still remember your second week?" "Vividly." His expression grew thoughtful. "I was terrified I was going to mess something up, accidentally hurt one of the animals or let a dog escape or something. Sarah paired me with this volunteer named Tom. Guy who'd been here for 5 years, knew every animal by name. He kept telling me to relax, that the animals could sense my anxiety." "Did they?" "Oh, absolutely. There was this one dog, a German Shepherd mix named Zeus. Beautiful animal, but he'd been abused before he came here. Really skittish around new people. Tom warned me to take it slow with him, let Zeus approach me instead of the other way around. Marcus paused to take a sip of his coffee, and I found myself leaning forward slightly, drawn into the story. But I was so nervous about doing everything right that I was practically radiating tension. Zeus took one look at me and went to hide in the back of his kennel. Wouldn't come near me for weeks. What changed? I learned to breathe, Marcus said simply. To be present instead of anxious. To trust that I belonged there even when I didn't feel like it yet. There was something in his voice, a weight that suggested he wasn't just talking about the shelter. Linda looked up from her crossword again, catching my eye with an expression that seemed to say, "Pay attention." "What happened to Zeus?" I asked. Marcus's face lit up. He got adopted about 6 months ago. Beautiful family with kids who understood that some animals need extra patience. Last I heard, he was sleeping on their 10-year-old's bed every night. I struggled for words. That must have felt incredible. It did. Marcus was quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee. It's part of why I keep coming back, I think. Moments like that when you realize that patience and time and just showing up consistently can make all the difference. I had the distinct feeling he wasn't just talking about Zeus anymore. "Ready to go meet some cats?" he asked, standing up and rinsing his cup in the small sink. The cat area was quieter than the dog runs, filled with the soft sounds of purring and the occasional plaintive meow. Sunlight streamed through high windows, creating warm patches on the concrete floor where several cats had arranged themselves for optimal napping conditions. "Milo's over here," Marcus said, leading me toward a row of individual enclosures along the far wall. I found him in the third kennel, curled up in a patch of sunlight, orange fur gleaming. When he saw me, he immediately stood up, stretching in that languid way cats had perfected, and moved to the front of his enclosure. "Hey, beautiful," I said softly, extending my fingers through the chain link. Milo bumped his head against my hand, purring loud enough to hear 3 kennels away. "He remembers you," Marcus observed. "Is that unusual?" "Not unusual exactly, but—" Marcus paused, watching Milo rub his entire body against the kennel door in an effort to get closer to my hand. "He's been here 3 months, and I've never seen him react to anyone like this. Usually takes him weeks to warm up to new people." I felt a warm glow of pride at the words. "Can we take him out?" "That's why we're here." Marcus opened the kennel door, and Milo emerged with dignified curiosity, sniffing the air and taking in his surroundings before approaching me. When he finally did, he walked directly to my feet and began weaving between my legs, purring like a small motor. "I think you've made a friend," Marcus said, and there was something soft in his voice that made me look up at him. He was watching me with that same expression I'd caught glimpses of the week before. Careful attention, like he was trying to memorize something. When our eyes met, he didn't look away immediately this time, just held my gaze for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. "Should we take him to the socialization room?" I asked, trying to ignore the way my pulse had quickened. The socialization room was a small space designed for potential adopters to spend time with animals they were considering taking home. Comfortable chairs, soft lighting, toys scattered on the floor. Milo explored it with cautious interest before settling onto my lap, purring and kneading my jeans with his paws. "He likes you," Marcus said, settling into the chair across from me. "The feeling's mutual." I scratched behind Milo's ears, smiling as his purr intensified. "Has anyone shown interest in adopting him?" "A few people have asked about him, but nothing's come of it yet. He tends to hide when potential adopters come around. Trust issues, probably." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Can't blame him, really. When you've been hurt before, it's hard to believe that someone might actually want to take care of you. Again, that weight in his voice that suggested deeper meaning. I found myself studying his profile as he watched Milo, noting the slight tension around his eyes, the way his hands rested carefully in his lap. "Is that what drew you to volunteering here?" I asked carefully. "Understanding what it's like to have trust issues." Marcus glanced at me, something flickering across his face. For a moment, I thought he might deflect, change the subject to something safer. But then he sighed, settling back in his chair. Partly, yeah. He was quiet for so long I thought he might not continue. I went through a rough breakup a couple years ago, really rough. Guy I'd been with for 3 years decided he wanted something different, someone different. The casual way he said guy sent a small shock of recognition through me. Not surprise exactly. I'd wondered, hoped maybe, but confirmation of something I'd been sensing without quite acknowledging. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. Marcus shrugged, but there was old hurt in the gesture. "It happens, but it left me pretty messed up for a while. Couldn't trust my own judgment anymore. Couldn't figure out what I'd done wrong or how I'd missed all the signs that he was already checking out of our relationship." Milo had settled into a more comfortable position on my lap, front paws tucked under his chest, eyes half closed in contentment. I focused on the rhythm of his purring, giving Marcus space to continue or not as he chose. "Anyway," Marcus went on, "I was pretty isolated for a while after that. Work, home, not much else. My sister finally got tired of me moping around and basically forced me to find something to do with my weekends that didn't involve feeling sorry for myself." "And you chose the animal shelter." "I chose the animal shelter." He smiled, but it was rueful. "Figured if I couldn't trust humans anymore, maybe I could at least help some animals. Simple, you know, feed them, walk them, clean up after them. No complicated emotional dynamics." But it wasn't that simple. Not even close. Marcus's smile became more genuine. "Turns out animals are just as complicated as people, just in different ways. And the other volunteers, well, you can't really avoid human connection when you're working towards something you all care about." I thought about Linda's knowing looks, the easy camaraderie I'd witnessed between Marcus and the other volunteers, the way Sarah had clearly trusted him to take care of the new guy. "It helped," I said. "It wasn't a question." "It saved me," Marcus said quietly. "Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, week by week, animal by animal. Reminded me that I could take care of things that needed taking care of, that I was worth something even when I didn't feel like it." The room fell quiet except for Milo's purring and the distant sounds of the shelter around us. I found myself studying Marcus's hands where they rested on the arms of his chair, noting the calluses I'd felt when we shook hands that first day, the careful way he held himself even in this moment of vulnerability. "What about you?" he asked eventually. "What made you decide to volunteer?" I considered the question, surprised by how much harder it was to answer than I'd expected. A week ago, I would have given him the same explanation I'd given myself, guilt about not doing enough, wanting to make a difference, needing something meaningful in my life. But sitting here with Marcus, with Milo purring on my lap and the morning light streaming through the windows, I realized those weren't the whole truth. "Loneliness, I think," I said finally. "Not dramatic loneliness, just, I don't know, I had this life that looked good on paper, decent job, nice apartment, enough money to do the things I wanted to do, but it felt empty somehow, like I was going through the motions of a life instead of actually living one." Marcus nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I kept thinking there had to be more," I continued. "Something that mattered, something that made me feel like I was actually making a difference instead of just existing. And now?" I looked down at Milo, then back at Marcus. "Now I think I was right. There is more. I just had to find it." The words hung between us, heavy with implication. Marcus was looking at me with that careful attention again, like he was trying to decode something in my expression. "The animals?" he asked softly. "The animals," I agreed. But we both knew I wasn't just talking about the animals. A knock on the door interrupted whatever moment we'd been building toward. Sarah's head appeared, apologetic smile already in place. "Sorry to interrupt, but we've got a family here to meet some of the cats. Would you mind if they use the room in about 10 minutes? "Of course," Marcus said, already standing. "We should get Milo back anyway." I lifted Milo from my lap, surprised by the pang of reluctance I felt at ending our quiet time together. The cat seemed equally reluctant to leave, purring and headbutting my chin as I carried him back to his kennel. "You'll see him again next week," Marcus said, watching me settle Milo back into his space. "I hope so." We spent the rest of the morning working through routine tasks, feeding, cleaning, exercising some of the higher energy dogs, but something had shifted during our conversation in the socialization room. The easy rhythm we'd found was still there, but now it was underscored with awareness, with the weight of things we'd revealed about ourselves. When we worked side by side cleaning kennels, I was hyper-aware of every moment our shoulders brushed. When Marcus handed me supplies, I found myself paying attention to the warmth of his fingers against mine, the way he seemed to hold the contact just a moment longer than necessary. It wasn't just the animals that kept me coming back. I realized as we worked, it was him, and the way being near him made me feel like I belonged. Around noon, we found ourselves in the small supply closet, restocking cleaning supplies and checking inventory. The space was cramped, barely big enough for one person, let alone two, and every time one of us moved, we brushed against the other. "Sorry," Marcus said for the third time, his back pressing against my arm as he reached for something on a high shelf. "It's fine," I said, though my voice came out rougher than I'd intended. He turned around, supplies in hand, and suddenly we were face to face in the narrow space, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, close enough to notice that he smelled like laundry detergent and something else, something warm and clean and distinctly him. "David," he said, and there was something in his voice that made my breath catch. "Yeah." But before he could answer, we heard footsteps in the hallway outside, accompanied by Linda's cheerful voice calling out to someone. "Marcus, David, you guys in here somewhere?" We stepped apart quickly, the spell broken by the reminder that we weren't alone in the world. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, looking flustered in a way that made my pulse race. "In here," he called back, his voice carefully neutral. "Just grabbing supplies." Linda appeared in the doorway, taking in our slightly guilty expressions with knowing eyes. "Sarah's looking for you, too. Something about helping with a transport run this afternoon." "We'll be right there," I said, surprised by how normal my voice sounded. Linda nodded and disappeared back down the hallway, but not before I caught what might have been a small smile on her face. "We should go," Marcus said, but he didn't move immediately, just stood there looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Yeah," I agreed. "We should." But neither of us moved for another moment, both of us aware of what had almost happened in that cramped space, both of us wondering what might have happened if Linda hadn't interrupted. The transport run turned out to be a trip to a veterinary clinic across town delivering 3 cats who needed spay and neuter procedures. Marcus volunteered to drive, and I found myself in the passenger seat of his Honda, cat carriers secured in the back, radio playing softly between us. "Thanks for coming with me," he said as we pulled out of the shelter parking lot. "These runs are usually pretty boring alone." "Thanks for asking me." The drive was comfortable, filled with easy conversation about music, about the neighborhoods we passed through, about nothing particularly important. But I found myself studying Marcus's profile as he drove, noting the way he drummed his fingers against the steering wheel in time with the music, the careful attention he paid to checking on the cats at red lights. "They're doing okay back there," I reported after turning to look at the carriers. "Good. Some of them get car sick, but these 3 are pretty hardy." At the clinic, we helped transfer the cats to the veterinary staff, filled out paperwork, made arrangements for pickup later in the week, routine tasks that somehow felt significant when we were doing them together. "Hungry?" Marcus asked as we got back in the car. "I know a place." The place turned out to be a small cafe tucked into a strip mall, the kind of local spot that served oversized sandwiches and had mismatched chairs around tables that wobbled slightly. We ordered at the counter and found a table by the window watching the afternoon foot traffic outside. "This is nice," I said, settling into my chair. "Do you come here often?" "Sometimes, after transport runs. They have good soup and it's quiet." Marcus unwrapped his sandwich, looking almost shy. "I don't eat out much usually." "Why not?" he shrugged. Got out of the habit, I guess. After my ex and I broke up, going to restaurants felt, I don't know, lonely, easier just to eat at home. There was something vulnerable about the admission, and I felt a surge of gratitude that he was sharing it with me. I know what you mean, I said. I do a lot of takeout. Eating alone in restaurants feels like everyone's watching, wondering why you're by yourself. Exactly. Marcus looked up from his sandwich, meeting my eyes. This is different, though. How so? It doesn't feel lonely. The simple statement hit me harder than it should have, because he was right. Sitting here with Marcus, sharing an ordinary lunch in an ordinary cafe, felt like the opposite of lonely. It felt like coming home. We ate slowly, reluctant to end the meal and return to the shelter. Marcus told me about his students, about the seventh grader who'd written a poem about his dog that had made Marcus tear up in the middle of class. I found myself talking about my job more honestly than I had in years, admitting that the work felt meaningless most of the time, that I stayed because it was comfortable rather than because it fulfilled me. Have you ever thought about doing something else? Marcus asked. Sometimes, but doing what? I'm 32 years old. Seems a little late to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. Is it? Marcus's voice was gentle. I didn't start teaching until I was 28. Spent my 20s bouncing between jobs that paid well but made me miserable. Finally decided life's too short to waste it being unhappy 8 hours a day. What made you finally make the change? Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering. Honestly, my ex. He was the one who encouraged me to go back to school, get my teaching credential. Ironic, considering how things ended, but he shrugged. Even relationships that don't work out can teach you important things about yourself. Like what? Like the fact that I'm happiest when I'm helping people, that I'm good at seeing potential in others, even when they can't see it in themselves. He paused, meeting my eyes. That sometimes the scariest changes end up being the best ones you ever make. There was something in his voice, something that suggested he wasn't just talking about career changes anymore. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, but I didn't look away. Maybe I should think about it, I said. Making a change, I mean. Maybe you should. We drove back to the shelter in comfortable silence, the afternoon sun slanting through the windshield, the radio playing quietly between us. I found myself dreading the end of the day, the return to separate cars and separate lives until the next Saturday rolled around. Same time next week? Marcus asked as we pulled into the shelter parking lot. Absolutely. But neither of us got out of the car immediately. We sat there in the late afternoon light, the engine ticking as it cooled, both of us reluctant to break whatever spell the day had woven around us. David, Marcus said finally, and there was something different in his voice, something careful and hopeful and nervous all at once. Yeah? I'm glad you came back. Me too. He turned in his seat to face me more fully, and I was struck again by how gold his eyes looked in certain light, by the way he had of looking at me like I was worth paying attention to. I mean it, he said quietly. I wasn't sure you would, after last week, after I asked if you were coming back like some desperate— You weren't desperate, I interrupted. You were hopeful. There's a difference. Marcus smiled, soft and surprised. Is there? Yeah. Desperate is asking because you're afraid of the answer. Hopeful is asking because you think the answer might be good. And which was I? I studied his face, taking in the way he was looking at me, the careful vulnerability in his expression. Hopeful, I said. Definitely hopeful. Something shifted in Marcus's expression, relief and something warmer mixing together. Good, he said, because I was hoping you'd say that too. The moment stretched between us, heavy with possibility and the weight of things we weren't quite ready to say yet. Then Marcus glanced at the dashboard clock and sighed. I should let you go, he said. It's getting late. Right, of course. But neither of us moved. We sat there in the parking lot as the afternoon light faded around us, both of us aware that walking away meant the end of whatever this day had been, whatever it had meant. Finally, reluctantly, I opened the car door. Thanks for today, for the transport run, for lunch, for everything. Thank you for coming with me. I walked toward my own car, keys already in my hand, trying not to look back. But when I reached the Honda, I couldn't help myself. I turned around to find Marcus still sitting in his car, watching me through the windshield. Our eyes met across the parking lot and something passed between us. A recognition, maybe. An acknowledgement of what was building between us, patient and careful and real. I lifted my hand in a small wave. Marcus smiled and returned it. I was halfway into my car when I heard his voice call out behind me. Quiet, almost hesitant, but certain enough to carry across the distance between us. Same time next week? I turned back, finding him leaning out of his car window, hair falling across his forehead, that same shy smile I was beginning to recognize as distinctly his. Yeah, I called back, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. Same time next week. The drive home felt different than it had the week before, less like leaving something behind and more like carrying something with me. The memory of Marcus's laugh over lunch, the way he'd looked at me in the supply closet before Linda had interrupted, the careful hope in his voice when he'd asked if I was glad I'd come back. Same time next week. 7 days that suddenly felt both endless and not nearly long enough.